Hello and welcome to the Maths Matrix. My name's Rebecca and in this video we're going to be doing positive and negative number work. I'm going to be filming an algebra series very soon. I'm going to start right at the beginning of algebra and take it right through to the very end of algebra, all in one series. And it's important that your positive and negative number work is very strong for that. Very often when I start to do simplifying expressions with people, or when I do expanding brackets and then simplifying the result of that, I sometimes find that they get the wrong answers when they're gathering like terms, and that isn't because there's anything wrong with that algebra, it's because their positive and negative number work isn't very strong. So before I start filming the algebra series, I thought I'd do a quick session on positive and negative numbers to help clear up some of that confusion. You've probably heard your teacher at school saying that two negatives make a positive, and while that's generally true, it's not exactly always true all of the time, and I think it's that phrase, two negatives make a positive, that sometimes causes a bit of confusion for people because it's not always explained to you when it is the case that two negatives make a positive and when it isn't. So I want to go through that in this video, then hopefully it won't confuse you anymore in the future. I'm going to put some questions on screen. If you know that you would know how to do all of those, then you don't need to watch this video, you can just start the algebra series. If you don't know how to do all of those, then stick with the video and that's what we'll cover. Here are the questions now. If you're still here, then I'm assuming there were some questions there that you couldn't do, so let's get started. All you'll need for today's lesson is paper and a pen. If you've got those, put a title of positive and negative numbers, and then put a subtitle of adding and subtracting with positive and negative numbers. And then this will make more sense when we actually do an example. But if you put the first number represents a starting position on a number line, the second number represents a movement along the number line. If the second number is positive, we move to the right, i.e., we move up the number line. If the second number is negative, we move to the left, i.e., down the number line. Our finishing position is the overall answer. And then put note. When adding or subtracting, two negatives only make a positive if they are right next to each other. Now all that'll make a lot more sense when I go through some examples, hopefully. So if you now put e.g., So if I have -4 and I want to take away 7, so that I have -4, -7, like that. This is not a case where two negatives make a positive because they're not right next to each other. So all this is this is a starting position of -4. So we would start here on a number line and then we would move 7 places. So we would move here. So if we had our number line, so if we had 0 there and then we'd have sort of 1, 2, 3 going off in that direction, so that we'd have -1, -2, -3, -4. So that would be our starting position on the number line. And then the -7 part tells us where we're moving. So we're moving in a negative direction, which is to the left, which is down the number line 7 places. So if I put some extra numbers in, I'm going to run out of space, but your number line would carry on all the way to infinity. If we start at -4 and we move 7 places to the left, we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and we would end up there at -11. So what that means is that -4 minus 7 gives an overall answer of -11, because that's where we would end up on the number line. So the first bit of notes that we've just made deal with that. And then I said, note, two negatives don't make a positive unless they're right next to each other when we're adding or subtracting. What I mean by that is that if we'd had -4 take -7, in this case we have two negative signs right next to each other. So what that means is that we're starting at -4 and then we're taking away -7. And because those negatives are right next to each other, then they turn into a positive. So we can change those two negatives that are right next to each other. Two negatives there do make a positive, so that becomes -4 plus 7. So all we're doing, if we see two negatives right next to each other like that, we just replace them with a positive. You may also see a bracket around the second number. So if you have a bracket around, you just kind of pretend it's not there and treat them as if they were right next to each other. What that then means is that we still have a starting position of -4. So we're starting at -4, but this time we're moving 7 places up the number line instead, so in the positive direction. So we'd be moving that way. So we'd have -3, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on. So if I wanted to move 7 places to the right, I'd go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and I'd finish up there at 3. So 3 would be the answer. Okay? So your first number represents where you start. Your second number represents a movement to the left or right. And you only have two negatives make a positive if they're right next to each other. The opposite of two negatives making a positive is kind of the one of each scenario. So if you have a positive and a negative right next to each other, or a negative and a positive right next to each other, they would each get replaced with a minus sign. So if you have two negatives, you replace them with a positive, and if you have one of each, regardless of which order they're in, you replace them with a negative. Okay? So I'll show you a couple more. So if we had 1 take 4, then on a number line, that just means that we're starting at 1. So that would be our start position. And so on a number line, we'd have 2 and 3 to that side of 1, and then we'd have 0 and -1 and -2 and -3 and so on down that side of the number line. So we're starting at 1 and we're moving 4 places to the left, 4 places in a negative direction or down the number line, which is going to take us 1, 2, 3, 4 places to -3. So 1 take away 4 just gives us an answer of -3, okay? Now if instead of 1 minus 4, if it had said 1 minus -4, then this time we've got 2 negatives right next to each other. And because there's 2 negatives right next to each other, then we can exchange those for a single plus sign. So we just bring them together to a single plus sign and leave the 1 and the 4 where they were, so that becomes 1 plus 4. Well, you don't even need a number line for that. That's like infant school maths. So that's you starting at 1, you're adding 4 on to give an answer of 5. If we'd had -1 minus 4, so almost the same, but with a minus in front of the 1, then that would represent a starting number of -1. So in this case, you would start at -1 and you would move 4 places down the number line. So you'd be coming along -2, -3, -4, -5, -6, and so on. So if we started at -1 and moved 4 places in a negative direction, 1, 2, 3, 4 would take us to -5, which means that -1 take 4 is -5. So as you can see there, although we've got 2 negatives, they're not giving us a positive answer overall because it's just a start position and a movement. Whereas in this one, they were right next to each other. So in that case, we exchange them for a positive. Let's say we had instead -1 plus -4. Well, in this case, we've got a plus and a minus right next to each other. And a plus and a minus right next to each other like that, they get replaced with a negative. So if you have one of each, they make a negative. Then that represents a starting position and a movement again. So it represents a starting position of -1. It represents 4 to the left, just like that one there above. So once again with this one, we'd have an answer of -5. Okay? Let's do some more. So if we had 2 plus -3, then a plus minus right next to each other get exchanged for just a minus. The 2 would stay as a 2, the 3 would stay as a 3, and then that becomes a start position of 2 and a movement 3 to the left. So we'd be starting at 2 and we'd be moving 1, 2, 3 places along, which would take us 2, 1, 0, -1. So the answer to that is -1. Okay. Now imagine instead we'd been given 2 take -3. Then in this case we've got 2 negatives right next to each other. And because they're right next to each other, that is a case of 2 negatives making a positive. So we would change the 2 negatives for a positive. We would leave the 2 as a 2. We would leave the 3 as a 3, and that then becomes just 2 plus 3, or a start position of 2 and a movement 3 places to the right, which is just 5. Okay? If we'd had -2 -3, then that would represent a start position of -2 and a movement 3 places down the number line. So again, this would not be a case of 2 minuses automatically making a positive answer. This is a start and a move because it's not got 2 signs right next to each other. So we would start at -2 and we would be moving 3 places down, which would take us to -3, -4 and -5. So the overall answer there would be -5. Okay? You don't tend to get double positives. If you did get two positives right next to each other, two the same always make a positive. So if you get two the same right next to each other, they make a positive. So if you did get, for some reason, 2 plus 3, that would just stay as 2 plus 3. So those two positives could just be exchanged for a single positive. I've never seen two positives right next to each other like that, so I can't really imagine a scenario where you would. But I know some of you will be wondering, if two negatives make a positive and one of each make a negative, what do two positives make? They would make a positive, okay? So if we have 7 take -2 -6 -1 -5 plus 3 -4 plus -2 and -6 -6. It's a tricky one. Have a go at those, hit pause, have a go at them. When you've done them, hit play, and I'll just go through the answers quite quickly, okay? All right, so looking at this top one, we have 7 take -2. Well, this is a scenario where the negatives are right next to each other, so that becomes 7 plus 2. And 7 plus 2 is just 9. So the answer to that one is 9. In the next one, we have -6 take 1. That represents starting at -6 on a number line and moving one place in the negative direction, so one place further down the number line, which would take you to -7. Then we've got -5 plus 3. That's a start position of -5 and a movement 3 up the number line in the positive direction. So that'd be -5, -4, -3, -2 would be where you'd end up with that one. Then we've got -4 plus -2. Well, a plus minus right next to each other, they get replaced with a minus because they're not two the same, they're one of each. So that becomes -4 -2, just changing those for a single negative sign. And then that's a start position of -4 and a movement 2 places to the left, which would take you to -5, -6. So the answer to that one is -6. And then finally, we've got -6 -6. Well, that minus get replaced with a plus, but that -6 just stays as -6. So all that's happened is those are replaced with a positive, and then that represents a starting position of -6 and a movement 6 places up the number line. So we'd be starting there at -6 and we'd be moving 6 places in that direction. So -5, -4, -3, -2, -1 and 0. So we'd end up at 0, which is a perfectly respectable mathematical number, and that would be the answer. Okay? If you now put a subtitle of multiplying and dividing with negative numbers. And then just put, it is here that two negatives always make a positive. And just underline the word here to emphasize it. So it is here that two negatives always make a positive. And then in brackets, just put two positives also make a positive. close bracket, and then put one of each, always make a negative. Okay, so this is a scenario that's actually a bit easier, because if you're multiplying two numbers together or you're dividing two numbers, if you have two the same, so they're either both positive or they're both negative, then the overall answer is positive. If you have one of them is negative and one of them is positive, regardless of which way around they go, the overall answer will be negative. So you don't have to think about a start position and a movement, and you don't have to think about two signs being right next to each other and exchanging them for anything. You just literally have to think, if you've got two negatives, they make a positive, and therefore if you have one of each, they must do the opposite, which is make a negative. Okay, so this is in a sense the easier one. So if we put e.g. minus 6 times 2, well, 6 2s are 12, and you've got a minus 6 being times by a not minus 2, and if it's not minus 2, then the inference is that it's positive 2, even though we don't go around writing positives in front of numbers normally. So we've got minus 6 times by ordinary 2, and a minus times a plus makes a minus answer overall, so it would just be minus 12. If we had minus 6 times minus 2, then 6 2s are still 12, and we've got a minus being multiplied by another minus, so the overall answer is positive 12. But like I've just said, we don't tend to go around writing positives in front of numbers, so if it's not negative, then it must be positive, in which case you don't have to write the plus sign in front of it. If you did in an exam, it wouldn't be considered wrong, but it would just be unusual. So if they're positive, you leave them plain usually. If we had 6 times minus 2, then 6 times 2 is 12. And there's nothing in front of the 6, so the inference is that it's positive 6 times by negative 2, and one of each always give us a minus answer. Okay, and then positive 6 times positive 2 would just look like that. It'd just look like the basic timesing that you learn at primary school. So you're unlikely to see positives together written like that. I can't again imagine why you would ever see that, but if you did, a positive times by a positive yields just a normal positive answer. All right. Dividing's just the same, so you start off by thinking what the numerical part of the answer is going to be, and then think about the sign. So if we had 15 divided by minus 3, well, 15 divided by 3 is just 5. And we've got a positive 15, because it's not got a negative sign in front of it, being divided by a negative 3. And if we've got one of each being multiplied or divided together, then the overall answer is negative. Okay? Whereas if we had minus 15 divided by minus 3, 15 divided by 3 is still 5. But this time we've got a negative being divided by another negative, so we've got two negatives, so they just leave us with a positive answer, so positive 5. It's impossible when timesing or dividing to have the negative signs right next to each other. So when we're adding and subtracting, we can have something like 2 take negative 4, so we can get those negative signs right next to each other. Or we can get 2 plus negative 4 and have a positive negative right next to each other. When we're timesing or dividing, if we have some combination of a 2 and a 4 being timesed or divided, that times and divide sign splits the numbers, so it's impossible for us to have a positive and a negative right next to each other. That times or divide sign will always interfere and get in the middle and stop the signs being right next to each other. I'll do a couple more and then I'll give you some of your own to do. So if we have 12 times minus 3 and minus 4 times minus 7 and minus 6 times 8. Then in the top one, 12 times 3 is 36, and a positive is being times by a negative, so we've got one of each, which gives a negative. In the next one, 4 sevens are 28, but we have two negative numbers being times together, so that'd give us an overall positive answer, so that would just stay as 28. And then in this one, 6 eights are 48, and we have a negative 6 being times by a not negative 8, therefore by a positive 8, and a negative times a positive always gives us a negative answer overall. And that's really all there is to it, okay? But it's important that you know how to do it, because when you come to be simplifying algebraic expressions, if you have something like minus 5x minus 4x, that's a start position of minus 5 and a movement 4 to the left, just with x's tagged on the end when you've finished. So I'll give you a mixed set to try, and then I'll go through it with you. So if you just hit pause and have a quick go at those. All right, so in the top one, we've got 20 divided by 4, which is just 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, just a normal divide to give an answer of 5. But we've got a positive 20 being divided by a negative 4 to give us an overall negative answer. In the next one, 5 sevens are 35. But we've got a positive being times by a negative to give us an overall negative answer. In the next one, 36 divided by 9 is 4. And we have negative being divided by another negative, which means the overall answer is positive. In this one, over means divided by. That's why a divided sign looks like a fraction. So over means divided by, so this means minus 10 is being divided by positive 2. So the overall answer is going to be a negative, and 10 divided by 2 is 5. In the next one, 1 8 is 8, and negative times negative is positive, so that will stay as 8. And then in that one, 60 over 10 means 60 divided by 10. So the numbers part is going to be 6, and we've got a positive being divided by a negative, so the overall answer will be negative. Okay, so hopefully that's helped to clear up any confusion about positive and negative numbers, and when two negatives do make a positive and when two negatives don't make a positive, and that'll really help to strengthen your algebra as well. If you've been having problems with that, it'll help to improve your algebra, hopefully. I'm going to pop the questions from the beginning back on screen, and hopefully now you'll be able to do them, and then I'll bob some answers in as well so that you can mark them. All right, thank you very much for watching. If you did find the video helpful, please consider liking or subscribing, and I will see you next time where we'll be making a start at algebra. See ya.